Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. For those of you watching this on YouTube, you will notice something very different. We are not in the studio. I am in the office's Zoom room, and I'm communicating with my co-host Jake, who appears to have gone to another dimension. For those people watching at home, Jake, show us some of your newfound superpowers.
Yeah, so it looks like you gave me your man flu, Adam, which I resent. But
Wow!
it seems
Whoa!
I've
No,
got it so bad that I'm regenerating.
that's
Okay,
extraordinary.
so we better wrap up this podcast before I turn into Jodie Whittaker.
How does it feel to have that? I mean, you're mid regeneration now. What do you think, or who do you think you're going to regenerate into? I mean, presumably you're going to come back, in the office in a few days' time, looking very different. I mean, who would you like to regenerate into? Like, I mean, visually, obviously you'll still be the same Nelson, but
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's so you don't get to pick your face, when you
yeah,
regenerate.
yeah.
I mean, we all know that Romana tried on a few different faces before she picked her regeneration, but it's so hard to tell. It could come back with two heads, could come back with no head. That'd be funny, wouldn't it? Me with no head.
Well, I mean, if I didn't have to listen to you as much, that'd probably be quite good. Anyway, what I do know is that every time the Doctor regenerates, there's usually like some kind of monologue, some kind of powerful and impassioned speech to the world. Do you have anything you want to get across this? Because this is going to be the last time we see this version of Jake Nelson. What do you want to say to the world, Jake?
Well, it'd be a bit odd to do like a whole regeneration monologue and then continue on and do a podcast episode like normal.
I
So
think
so
no, I'm not as big a Doctor Who fan as yourself, but I am aware of it. But I know that the regenerations can be very quick, or they can be quite long. I think gone for
sure,
days, can't
sure.
they?
But it'd be a bit strange to like have my last words and then just sort of wait around for a bit and then just continue saying more words, wouldn't it?
Well, okay. So what we're going to do is you keep thinking about that, and
Yeah.
then at the end of the podcast, I want some kind of monologue, some kind of. I mean, obviously, the worry is that mid-show you could regenerate, which would be
Yeah.
rubbish because I don't know what we're going to do then. I'm gonna have to get Ben on. But yeah, so have a little think and just try not to fully regenerate by the end of the show.
Okay, well I'll do my best, I'll be like Peter Capaldi in that Christmas special. It'll be fine.
Okay, can you just show me your hand one more time?
Yeah. No, it's still
Whoa! I mean, this
regenerating.
is amazing. It's as amazing. The senior bosses at Momentum, they're gonna love this stuff. What you done on the podcast? Oh, we had one of the guests regenerate. Amazing. Right. Anyway,
More
before we
suited for Space Connect, you'd argue.
yes, that's very true. We could probably put that out on that platform too. Right. Anyway, before we talk about the week's news, we have, as ever, we do our shout outs. And this week, we're going to be talking about the Australian Aviation Summit. It is the event of the year for the aviation world. So basically, we have our Australian Aviation Awards as ever, which are going to be taking place on the 29th of August at the Star in Sydney. And then during the day, we're going to have our first ever Australian Aviation Summit. And we've got lots of very high profile and very cool speakers that we can already announce, and including Daniel Dott, who is the head of fuel and aviation decarbonisation at Virgin Australia. So he's the person that they are kind of leading the charge, kind of working towards a sustainable future. And as you probably all know, aviation globally is committing to try to hit net zero by 2050. So he's going to be talking about how possible that is or isn't and what kind of progress is being made. We also have aviation royalty, genuine aviation royalty in Captain Deborah Laurie, who you probably all know is the first female airline pilot or airliner pilot in Australia. She famously went toe to toe with Reg Ansett and won this extraordinary year-long kind of legal dispute. And she's going to be talking about how we improve diversity in the industry. We have Jessie Suskin from Google Wing Drone Delivery, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on the show. They're doing hundreds of thousands of drone deliveries here in Australia, and he's going to be talking about the future of drones, the future of technology, and kind of how it's moving forward. We're also going to be joined by Annie Daly, who is a board member of the Aviation Aerospace Australia, and she also set up the Australian Space Diversity Alliance as well. So in terms of diversity, she's one of the leading names. our partners at Leidos, and their chief executive, Paul Chase, will be attending as well. And we are hopefully going to have many more names that we're going to be announcing in the coming days. But the idea of this summit is that we're going to be discussing the big issues with all the biggest players in the industry. If you want to come along, technically go to australianaviation.com.au/Australian aviation summit. Just put it in Google. It's a lot easier. Go to Google, put it in there. You've got all the information there. You can go have a look at our different sessions. You can have a look at our speakers, and obviously you can buy a ticket as well. If I was you listening, I'd come along to the summit and then come along to the awards in the evening. Even if you're not nominated, or even if you're not a finalist, it's obviously a fantastic occasion. You get one of these big fancy slap up dinners. You get to meet Jake as well in whatever form he is going to take. And it's going to be a really, really good. It'll be good fun, very informative, and you have a bit of a laugh in the evening as well. So go and check that out and come along to Australian Aviation Summit and Australian Aviation Awards. Deep breath. Right, yes. So we've talked about that. We've also had a very, very, very big week of news, which has kept us very busy here. Jake, let's start off with the most obvious story of the week. And I think this was actually how your regeneration began. I think it started on Friday afternoon. The first signs we saw of this were that all the card machines globally went down. All Windows computers crashed. Presumably the Daleks were involved. Jake, tell us a little bit about the they called it the tech pandemic, the tech apocalypse on Friday. What happened and how did this affect aviation?
Yes, well, I'm going to shake my glowing finger here at CrowdStrike. Very, very naughty CrowdStrike. This was it was CrowdStrike, this cybersecurity provider, bungled a software update on Friday, causing what was dubbed the world's biggest ever international IT shutdown. And basically, it played havoc all over the world, including in the Australian aviation sector, where we saw airlines unable to get their flights off the ground. You know, baggage systems affected, check-in issues. Jetstar had to cancel basically all its flights until 2 a.m. Saturday, though other airlines were largely able to get their aircraft going. Blue screens on Microsoft operated systems. And you know, it was absolute pandemonium. I think, ironically, one of the only airlines that came out of this unscathed was Southwest in America, which you know, as we all know, runs its entire aviation computing system off a old PlayStation 2 in Iowa somewhere. So congratulations, Southwest, I guess. But it was a complete meltdown.
It was a complete meltdown.
Apparently, it was caused by a Falcon content update for Windows hosts. So there you go.
So I would say overall, and I would say the Australian aviation industry coped incredibly well with a situation that wasn't in any way their fault. So Virgin and Qantas, or at least the main Qantas brand, and also Rex as well, they actually cancelled very minimum flights. There was definitely significant delays, but generally speaking, they kept going very well, and all the airports as well kept going very well. Jetstar, that were the ones that were kind of the worst affected, as Jake said there. They basically had to ground all of their flights, or virtually all of their flights, from kind of Friday afternoon till Saturday very, very early in the day. And this was due to the fact that I believe, and I might have bungled the science myself, but essentially Jetstar, I think they were using that CrowdStrike software or that update, and this affected their kind of, I think it was baggage mostly, their baggage platforms, and also their check-in as well. So those things all went down. And also problematically for Jetstar, it also affected their kind of communication system. So it became very hard for them to reach out to customers and tell them what happened. Again, I feel sorry for Jetstar because it wasn't in any way their fault. They weren't to know. And ironically, of course, the companies using this CrowdStrike thing, I don't understand the technology. They obviously were, this is essentially like a cybersecurity tool. So they were trying to protect themselves. And obviously it's all gone a little bit wrong. And there was pandemonium for a few hours. It felt kind of like COVID for technology. I remember walking to the KFC and they weren't taking any payments. And I remember being like, this is how the world ends. What's extraordinary about this? And again, we are not a tech show, we're an aviation show, but essentially
But
what's
if you want
happened.
if you want a good tech podcast, cyberdaily.au, our sister publication.
Yes, I was going to grab David from Cyber Daily to come on the podcast, but he's not in the office today. But essentially what's happened is somebody somewhere's messed up. Somebody somewhere writing this code has got it wrong and has basically sent the whole world into meltdown for a few hours. It's extraordinary, isn't it, Jake, that we are so vulnerable to these kind of things. One person messes. I mean, it's the ultimate bad day at work. You think you've had a bad day at work. You've not had as bad a day as this person.
No, it's there's an old comic from XKCD, it's like basically a giant block tower with all modern digital infrastructure, and it's all being held up by a single block labeled like project some guy in Nebraska has been tirelessly maintaining for years. So it goes to show you how kind of vulnerable everything is, when if we got so many of our eggs in this one basket with CrowdStrike, and something goes wrong with CrowdStrike or with Cloudflare or Akamai or any of these other companies, then it takes down a giant chunk of modern digital infrastructure.
One of the things I thought that was quite interesting about this is aviation probably has, of all industries in the world, it's the one with the best safety record, or the best reliability in these sort of things. And that's because aviation essentially operates on a model that everything has backup after backup after backup after backup. So if something goes wrong, they've planned for it. And if a thing that's meant to fix that goes wrong, they've planned for it. And so they've developed the whole system in such a way that the chances of your aircraft crashing and everyone dying is extraordinarily unlikely. And of course, the most obvious example is that an aircraft will usually have two jet engines, and it can effectively fly perfectly well or almost as well on just one. And in fact, the aircraft is designed to be able to fly perfectly well with no engines that are operating, because of course it can glide. So everything is been done in such a way that they're always thinking worst case scenario. It's extraordinary that in the tech world, they're not necessarily operating with this same mentality, because one person messing something up causes chaos.
Well, there's an old joke I heard to that point, Adam. It was a flight heading from, I think, Sydney to LA or something, over the Pacific. Captain comes over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This is your captain speaking. Just letting you know that one of our engines has shut down on us. Fortunately, we still have 3 engines left. We'll still make it to LA, but we may be an hour late. Comes over the PA a few minutes later. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just letting you know that another one of our engines has shut down. We still have 2 engines. We can fly perfectly well on 2 engines, but we will be 2 hours late into LA. And then a couple of minutes later, it comes on and says, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just letting you know that this is your captain speaking, just letting you know that another of our engines have shut down. We should still be able to make it to LA on 1 engine, but we will be 3 hours late. And at this point, one of the passengers turns to the person next to them and goes, geez, I hope we keep the 4th engine. Otherwise, we won't get into LA until tomorrow.
That's a terrible joke. Okay, welcome back. So after that appalling joke by Jake, we're going to move on from talking about the tech pandemic, the tech apocalypse. What should we talk about next, Jake? What's the next big story that we should steam into?
Well, I think you've done a story, Adam, a very interesting one about Project Sunrise.
So yes, so basically, as for those that aren't aware, Project Sunrise is, of course, the kind of code name for Qantas's plans to fly direct flights initially from Sydney to London and New York, and this will be using a new fleet of A350-1000 ULRs. So you nerds listening, I got it right. And what makes this aircraft unique, particularly unique to Qantas, and they're going to have a fleet of 12 of these, is that they've done some fancy stuff with the fuel thing so that it can fly. See, I lost it. So that it can fly further. So once these flights start, they will basically be the longest direct flights in the world. Now, as part of the kind of the criticism of this is that it might be all well and good if you're in first class to have your 20 or 21 hour flight, but if you are in cattle class, if you're in economy, that's a very long time not to be able to stretch your legs. So one of the things that Qantas have done is basically research the kind of the lighting on board the aircraft, and effectively it's a kind of jet lag busting idea. So what it's going to try and do is use the lighting to get you to sleep, use the lighting to wake you up, and also use the lighting in such a way that it will kind of mimic the time zone you're heading towards. Now, I don't know if I can get the story up. Have you got the story up there ready to go, Jake? I didn't get this up. Yeah, maybe you can read some of the quotes. I'm not sure if this is nonsense or if this is actually really, really clever, but they come out with all sorts of like fancy speak.
Yeah, so Qantas said that it had tested hundreds of these lighting patterns and sequences with representatives from Airbus and from the Charles Perkins Centre at the University of Sydney and the K-On Design Office. Qantas says, quote, based on state-of-the-art modeling of circadian rhythms, the Charles Perkins Centre advised the optimal spectral irradiances for light to promote circadian adaptation, sleep, and wake. These were implemented and tested throughout the lighting workshops in Hamburg and adjusted for eye comfort and appearance. The lighting sequence will be tailored to help passengers adjust to their destination time zone before they set foot on the ground.
So yeah, so it does. I mean, they have put a lot of effort into this. Whether this is a PR stunt or whether this is, I say, of course it's genuine. Whether it's actually going to help, I don't know. So they are currently looking at launching point. We're going to get their first A350-1000 ULR in 2026. I think they are. They're looking at it arriving. So obviously this is going to be the big argument. Are people actually want to put themselves through this very long flight? But at least Qantas are thinking about it. Now, this is one of a number of innovations that they've put in. The other one is, as we joked about, about 6 months ago, was the wellness zone, which is basically like a stretching area. So those people in economy can go. Maybe there's like a bar you could grab onto, and they're even going to have some, like, I think, like exercise videos on the TV and stuff to help get you through it. Jake, what's your view of this lighting? Do you think this is nonsense, or do you think this is actually going to help? Bearing in mind that you yourself are experimenting with lighting physically at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been studies that show that, you know, different kinds of light before you go to bed can like affect the way you sleep. Like I think you're supposed to avoid blue light in the evening. You know, that's why all these phones and monitors and you know computers have blue light option, no blue light options, and you know you've got the glasses that block blue light. So it's possible that it could work. I'm not a sleep expert, so I couldn't tell you, but it's certainly an interesting thing to try. And you know they say that there's going to be having like special lighting scenes, like you know they said 12 lighting scenes that will help you stay awake or go from daytime to dark or simulate an Australian sunrise. That's nice. Apparently the well-being zone is going to have soft blue enriched light that will create like a daytime sky effect with these slow-moving clouds during the day to keep customers awake. A moonlight-inspired scene with reflections of rippling water to relax customers in the well-being zone. And the six enclosed first class suites are going to have a fully customizable lighting sequence. So they're really going all out with the lighting here.
I do have a little bit of experience with this actually, because back in the day, when I used to work for men's lifestyle magazines, I once called up Philips, and other electrical manufacturers are available. I did call up Philips and I basically said to them, look, I'm moving into a new apartment. I wasn't. Can you send me as much free stuff as you can? And I might review it. I don't think I did. But one of the things they sent me was this alarm clock, which was like a light and alarm clock that simulated the sunrise. So what would happen, rather than just your, you know, the alarm goes off at 6 in the morning or whatever, what would happen is at like 10 minutes to 6, it would start simulating the sunrise. It would literally come over my bed at the same time as it would play the sounds of kind of birds tweeting and whatever, and would over the course of 20 minutes start to take you from your deep sleep and bring you awake. And I must say it was glorious. It was, I don't even know what happened to it, but it was very, very good. So if it's as good as that, I can see potentially it could work.
Well, and I think the Google Nest hub, that smart display that Google has that as well, the sunrise alarm. So it will gently brighten the screen before the alarm is set to go off, and simulate a sunrise that way. So there are, yeah, like you said, and Philips and Google, and there are companies doing this. So maybe it could work. I don't know.
Maybe
I'm
it
not a
could
sleep
work.
expert. I don't work for the Charles Perkins Center.
No, no. All right. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. Jake, what should we cover next?
So I think we should have a look at how our airports are doing, because we've got the figures out for the financial year, or in the case of Sydney, for the second quarter of the calendar year. And it's been interesting. We already know that Perth has surpassed its pre-COVID capacity. Melbourne and Brisbane are each hovering around 95% of pre-pandemic levels. In terms of total passengers. Sydney is still lagging behind. So in the second quarter of 2024, Sydney was only at about 92% of pre-COVID passenger capacity, and that's because it was dragged down a bit by domestic figures, which are still only at 90.5% of quarter two of 2019. So domestic is holding Sydney back.
That's quite. So we'll just say that again. 90.2.
So 92% of pre-COVID passenger
92%.
capacity total. Domestic recovery rate is 90.5%.
Which, to be fair now, does look quite shocking. And that's not a slur at Sydney Airport at all. But we are now, so if you think that the kind of the lockdown kind of in Sydney, kind of what formally ended in September, October 2021, that we started international flying, 6 months after that, or not even 6 months after that. So we are now a good 2 years, 2.5 years out of formal COVID restrictions. And still, we're looking at the industry not being back to normal. Now, I seem to remember at the time reporting that, the kind of the most pessimistic kind of predictions were that at the end of 2023 or midway through 2024, we would be back to normal. But actually, it looks like in some ways our recovery is strong. So international aviation is picked up. But domestic is still lagging behind. Why do we think this is?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? So Scott Charlton from Sydney Airport has cited higher airfares, lack of capacity, and a downturn in discretionary business travel that is affecting demand. Probably, I mean, the only major airport that it flew to was of course Melbourne, but probably the demise of Bonza hasn't helped, because that's taken capacity out of the market. But it just seems like we're getting back to domestic airfares are too high, which is where we need more competition in the sector. And I mean, Rex is doing a pretty good go of it, as we'll discuss later on. Bonza was having a go at bringing down airfares, but now that we're now that we're in a post Bonza era, not that we've gone a long time without mentioning Bonza on this podcast, but now that we're in sort of the post Bonza era, there's one of those sources of competition for these airfares is gone.
It's quite interesting you said there that they're seeing that demand for business travel is not quite what it was. And if you remember during the kind of the middle of COVID, during the COVID lockdowns, we thought, how would Zoom and how would a world where we're much more comfortable in talking over video change things? And obviously the first thought was, would anyone ever go to the office again? And particularly in the first year or so after COVID, I know here at Momentum, barely anyone came in. And what we've seen is, slowly but surely people being kind of marched back to the office, kind of Australia-wide and globally. You still have a little bit of working from home, but I think most companies now are on 3 or 4 days a week, and it's kind of like you need to get back to where you were before. But with business travel, I think it's affected this more because people are maybe more confident to do a deal over video in a way that maybe they weren't a few years ago. And that doesn't mean that there's not domestic travel. People are still going to go on holiday. They're still going to go and meet people. But actually, business now is increasingly being done by video. It's interesting that, say, here at Momentum, or in fact, pretty much all companies that have sales teams, previously, 95% of their meetings would have been over coffee, whereas now actually 95% of their meetings are over video. So it kind of begs the question as to whether that business, business class demand will ever really go back to what it is before, because now we're 2 years out of the pandemic. It looks like the shakedown of that is, do we really need to fly business anymore?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always going to be things like conferences. Business conferences, you would still need to fly, but certainly just for a sales meeting, Zoom will do that fine. It will do it, quicker, cheaper, and with less hassle than flying someone all the way to Melbourne for a meeting.
Yeah, exactly. So we wonder if aviation will, I mean, it probably eventually will get back to those pre-COVID numbers, but certainly nobody would have expected it 2 years later. There was still that kind of hangover. And talking of data, we have had the latest round of BITRA data, which for those of you unaware is kind of on-time performance. So this is how well the airlines are faring. Now, we introduced this idea a month ago on the show that there's so much data and everybody always claims to be the winner. So we introduced this concept of the Jake Nelson Airline of the Month, the definitive answer as to who was the best performer. Maybe
Still looking for a good name for that.
Yeah, exactly. A great name for that. So maybe, Jake, you could go through what the data tells us, who's claiming victory and how, and then maybe end up with the big reveal of who is the Jake Nelson Airline of the Month. Go for it.
So this is an interesting one. Qantas in the BITRA data. This is Qantas and Qantas linked together, which BITRA tends to do. They lump all. They will have the stats for all QF designated flights, which is Qantas and Qantas linked together, and they will also have individual operating entities. So Qantas and Qantas linked together were the most reliable major airline according to the BITRA data for on-time arrivals and on-time departures, though they had the most cancellations. So on that measure, they did beat Rex. However, this comes with an asterisk because we've seen figures from Rex itself, and Rex, for its domestic jet operations in isolation, beat the pants off of Qantas. So we had 78.5% on-time arrivals for Qantas and Qantas Link, 79.6 on-time departures, 3.3% cancellations. For Rex's jet operations alone, so disregarding the regional subs, 82% on-time arrivals, 84.1% on-time departures, and 0.9% cancellations.
So that's very good. 0.9%. That probably was like 1 or 2 flights were cancelled.
Yeah, it's not a huge number of cancellations. So yes, if you take all of Rex's operations together, Qantas beat them. But if you isolate Rex's domestic operations and put aside for a moment the regional ones, for jet operations alone, for the domestic intercity stuff, Rex was better.
So did Rex actually come to us with that particular stat?
Yeah, so we reached out to Rex to see if they had any comment, and Rex we got figures back from Rex with their domestic jet reliability, and so it's interesting to see kind of the split that happens when you take those jet figures in isolation. And also when Bonza was still flying, should have like a Bonza counter in the corner of the screen for whenever we mention Bonza. But when Bonza was still flying, Bonza did pretty well on reliability as well, with the exception of December last year, where a bunch of flights were cancelled due to the Gold Coast debacle. But Bonza and Rex were sort of pretty consistently high up there in reliability, and they were airlines with smaller fleets.
It's interesting, though, that yet again, effectively, everyone's found a way to claim victory with all of this different data. Let's come to the grand announcement. Who is your Jake Nelson Airline of the Month?
Qantas comes with an asterisk. It's Qantas with an asterisk.
But you can't
Over
do that. No, 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 no. We can't. No, no. We just need one name, Jake. Who is the Jake Nelson Airline of the Month?
Adam, it's my award, and I could put as many asterisks on it as I want to. Give me this in these moments before I regenerate.
Okay.
It is
Okay.
Qantas with an asterisk.
Qantas with an asterisk. So if you are listening, Vanessa Hudson, and you do want to use this on your billboards or on your TV advertisements, you can claim yourself to be the Jake Nelson Airline of the Month. But do remember to include that asterisk because that's what the great Jack Nelson wants you to do. Okay, welcome back. So we probably should have ended the episode on a Jake Nelson Airline of the Month, but we do have more news to get through. Jake, what are we talking about next?
Talking of airports, as we did earlier in the show, interesting thing coming out of Newcastle Airport over the past week. They have been surveying passengers about the potential of putting on direct flights to Perth. So they launched the survey last week. Excuse me, looking to gauge interest in Perth flights for customers in Newcastle and Hunter region. They've already attracted more than, as of the time that we wrote it, so they've probably got even more now because we wrote this last week, but they had already attracted more than 4,500 responses. There was also some questions about the potential of flights to Europe. Now, Dr. Peter Cock, the CEO of Newcastle Airport, has basically said, he's told us, we are seeing a lot of demand for services to Perth. It is the 5th most popular destination for people in the airport's catchment. He says that there's enough demand to offer 21 direct flights each week from Newcastle Airport. That's 3 flights a day, 7 days a week. So if this did get off the ground, so to speak, it would be a pretty big thing for the people of Newcastle and the Hunter who, currently have to schlep all the way down to Sydney if they want to fly over to Perth. And it would, you'd think it might also take a bit of pressure off of Sydney Airport and maybe bring some airfares down if there's more options to get from the New South Wales sort of Sydney Newcastle metro conglomeration region over to Perth.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jake, and obviously those of you playing the drinking game can take a shot. Is this not effectively an example of Bonds' point-to-point model? Is this not kind of exactly what they were trying to do? Because rather than having to go to another major capital city airport and then make your way to Perth, you are cutting out that layover and going directly there. Would you not say that to an extent they were inspired by the idea that these unusual routes potentially can work?
Possibly. I mean, it's Bonza never flew to Perth.
No.
They did fly out of Newcastle on a couple of routes, but Bonza never got as far west as Perth. That said, Rex is finally going to Perth. Rex started its flights from Melbourne and Adelaide to Perth, I believe, last month. So there is clearly demand for more services linking the east and west coasts.
I've never actually been to Perth properly. I've been to Perth Airport. Have you been to Perth?
I have. My grandmother lives there. My mother used to live there.
Is it nice?
Yeah, it's pretty nice. They've got a lovely train system.
Beautiful.
We love the trains go down the middle of the freeways, which saves some space.
Nice.
They've got lovely waterfront along the Swan River, and the Swan bells are nice if you like bells. Very quiet. It can be pretty quiet over there. But no, Perth, very, very nice place.
All right, nice. And talking of, well, we've had one potential new route may start, but we've also heard this week that another very significant route will close. We've had Virgin pulling the plug on their flights to Japan, and this is significant because when Virgin went into administration, one of the things it did was to kill the vast majority of their international flights and also stop flying kind of long haul international flights altogether. However, what was it, 6 months ago or so now? Virgin did start flying to Japan, which technically I believe is a long haul route.
This was last year, a year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. So they launched this route to Japan. They're now pulling it. Jake, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so they're going to drop Cairns to Tokyo Haneda from the 24th of February. And they're going to. It's currently these flights are using the 737 Max 8. They're going to pull those from the Cairns to Tokyo route and put them into more domestic flights. Now, Virgin says that this is because inbound volumes from Japan are still low. They're about 35% below the point where they were pre-pandemic. One factor is the low value of the yen. It's 40% lower against the Australian dollar than in 2019. Now, Virgin is not, giving up on Japan entirely. It does still have its code-share partnership with All Nippon Airways, ANA, which is, I believe, the largest airline in Japan. That flies 17 times weekly between Australia and Japan, and you can get that through the Virgin website through the code share. So it's if you want to buy a flight through Virgin and get your velocity points to Japan, you can still do that with ANA, but Virgin will no longer be operating its own services up there.
Yeah, it's quite a significant moment because, and I totally understand why they did it. The demand just wasn't there, and obviously everyone's going to get a refund. But this does now kind of inch Virgin away from their ambitions of doing, the occasional longer flight. So it's very significant in that regard. Right, let's move on to the next story. And I have to talk about this now. Well, I have to. And this is Google Wing delivery drones. So I do my usual introduction. You may not realize this, but in Australia each year there are hundreds of thousands of drone deliveries. Yes, really. And that are being done by kind of Google subsidiary or by Alphabet subsidiary Wing. And they now mostly operate out of Logan and in southeast Queensland. And the idea is that they operate in areas basically where you may not necessarily have a coffee shop at the end of every street. So not necessarily like right bang in the middle of a city centre, but in those places where that's a little bit more difficult to get these things. And these drones will do the trip. They fly sort of point to point, usually now from the kind of the roof of a shopping mall or from a supermarket car park, and they will fly point to point. So in a couple of minutes, and they focus on smaller packages. So this is kind of takeaway food or coffee, etc. And obviously it makes total sense because it's cheaper and quicker than get a traditional Uber driver to come and bring you things. So obviously when it turns up, it won't actually have gone cold. And Jesse Suskin, who's one of the kind of top people at Google Wing in Australia, he sort of famously, I would say, referred to Logan in Queensland as the drone delivery capital of the world. And so Google globally has kind of thrown its support about kind of testing this thing out, or I say testing, it's fully operational in Australia and in Logan. And now in their most significant move yet, they have moved to the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So obviously, if you're a comms person, this is the comms dream. We've got the city in the world most obsessed about coffee, getting their coffee delivered via drone. And this is already launched. So it has launched in one of the biggest shopping malls in Australia. And the drones will basically take off from the roof. And what that means is that all of the stores that sell products kind of capable of being flown, all that has to happen is that you place your order on the app and somebody will run from that store, take it up to the roof, and will be put on the drone and will then fly over. And I did an interview with Jesse from Google Wing. He was talking about, what a big move this is for the company. But also this kind of paves the way for a future where potentially drones could fly to an individual shop potentially, because the more of these shopping malls that they get tied in, the more kind of hubs they have, and eventually they'll all be able to cross over. So say you have two shopping malls around the corner from one another, the drone might fly off, do its delivery, and then rather than fly back to base, fly back to another hub, another nest, I think as they call them, to charge up over there. And the more of them that they've got, the more potential that they have to fly directly to individual stores. So this is actually quite an incredible thing. So when we're next in Melbourne, I want to go and actually try this out. But we will see now, for the people that live in those eastern suburbs, seeing a drone fly overhead with a coffee will not be the stuff of science fiction. It's something that's actually happening, which I think is absolutely amazing.
Now, seeing the drone drinking the coffee, that would be the stuff of science fiction, I'd say.
Well, in a sense, it kind of does. So the way it works, good link there. The way it works is that you don't actually, the drone kind of does all the work. So the drone will hover above the ground and will lower a kind of a wire And a Google employee can kind of latch your coffee or latch the package onto it, and it flies off. And then when it comes to deliver this, you don't actually touch it. It kind of automatically hovers in your kind of garden, and it will lower it down, and then we'll like detach the package, and it all works automatically. And one of the things that Google are also working on, because at the moment the Google employee kind of latches it on, they've actually created a kind of device that does that for you. So what this means is that you might be able to have a situation where you don't need the Google employee. Any shop could have one of these, and they put it in this device, and it allows the drone to kind of grab it and drink the coffee almost itself, and then fly to where you want it to go. But it is absolutely incredible to think that Australia now is an absolute pioneer in this. So I think they also have them. They've just started doing them in Ireland, and I think they do it. It might be Dallas off the top of my head in the US, and they're doing this as well. But Australia is their main hub globally for doing this. So, and Melbourne as well is the biggest global city they've tried it in. So I think Melbourne has a population of 4 or 5 million. So this is now the first kind of big global city they've done this. So it's a kind of a real kind of landmark moment, arguably for the company, and also for Australian aviation, because in 10 years time, when this is everywhere, we will be able to say that actually Australia pioneered this technology.
Yeah, it's I'll be interested to see how well it takes off, so to speak. And whether I'll be able to get stuff drone delivered to my house at some point soon, because Google Wing, come to Sydney. We've got so many people here.
We've got a lot of people here. We've got a lot of people here right now. Before we before we get to the monologue at the end, which we're all very excited about, and another Rex story. Rex has launched a new ad campaign, which is very Rex, if you're familiar with their combative, unusual style of doing things. Jake, tell us a little bit about what is this. Tell us the concept of this ad campaign.
Yeah, the slogan is an airfare to remember, which is I think playing off the classic film An Affair to Remember.
Oh, I think they'd have got that. But yeah, go on.
Well, not all of our audience, maybe classic film buffs, Adam. We don't know how many cinephiles watch our podcast. But yes, so this campaign, in conjunction with agency T&PM Australia, it's got all of these, witty slogans like "Get back with your Rex," "Go all the way with your Rex," "Give your Rex a second look." Yeah. They've got a reel saying "Your Rex comes with baggage," to highlight the baggage inclusions on the aircraft. So it's really using it. You can't really imagine another airline doing this other than Rex. Virgin might. But Rex is really this is a campaign that sort of plays to Rex's strength as the underdog against the two major airlines. Britt Lippert, who's the general manager of T&PM Australia, says that Rex is a scrapper from the bush who moved into big jets and brought competition. She said until Rex came along, fares between Melbourne and Perth, for example, hadn't shifted in 10 years. There was little incentive for the major airlines to change or to improve services, but building up a brand when the big two hold a 95% market share, dwarfing the banks and supermarkets, requires a powerful tool, and we think humor is the best one. And she did take a bit of a swipe, saying, talking about the bigger airlines taking people for granted. She said, "You can have as many doe-eyed choristers singing on the Brooklyn Bridge as you like, but if you cannot get on a flight, get a refund, use your COVID credits, or find your bag, it's a mismatch."
Oof. Now, what I imagine is that, so this is like some fancy pants ad agency, and I can imagine like they're having a meeting because they don't do much work in ad agencies, and some snotty nosed like interns go, "I got an idea. Why don't we work on the fact that Rex sounds like X, and we can say your Rex comes with baggage?" And they'd have been like, "Great idea." And they'd have presented this to John Sharp, now the chairman of Rex, and he would have loved that. He would have loved that.
Well, John Sharp told us, quote, "The cleverness and simplicity of the campaign has been applauded by advertising media, and we hope Australian travellers will embrace its message and playfulness too." He said, "Rex has always said there is competition out there. People just need to support it. And we hope the campaign will be a reminder and give folks a laugh at the same time."
That's very nice. That's very nice. Right now, before we end the show, in a segment that will mean nothing to anybody that's not watching this on YouTube, Jake, this is your regeneration. Show us your hand one more time.
Is
this your joke that you've stopped it?
No, it's I think it's happening, Adam, and
it's happening, right?
You know, I've seen things that you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time like tears in. Wait, no, that's Blade Runner. Oh, bugger.
Well, that's the end of the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back on the show.
Hang on, wait.
You've ruined it. Now you've ruined it.
Oh no. Oh, this is bad.
God.
No, this is much worse.
What is this? What is
Oh
this?
no, this I gotta find a way to undo this. This is so bad.
God save me. On that note, we will wrap up this show. And God, we'll be back at the same time next week. But from now, from me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.